Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Thursday's edition of Alaska Weather on the 16th day of June 2022. I'm David Percy, and the first graphic we've got is the hazardous weather graphic, and there are no watches, warnings, or advisories out for the interior from the Arctic coast down to the Gulf of Alaska, Kodiak. No watches, warnings, advisories for the Panhandle or the Bering Sea or the Aleutians. And moving on to the fire danger graphic here, pretty low over the southwest interior, Bristol Bay, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta into at least the southern half of the Kuskokwim Valley, but still have some high fire danger, central Kenai Peninsula, actually the west central Kenai Peninsula area there, and up into Anchorage, Palmer, and then some very high fire danger in the Susitna Valley, and kind of an expanding area of high and very high fire danger over in the Copper River Basin with it looks like some extreme starting to show up over toward May Creek, McGrath area, or I'm sorry, the McCarthy area there off to the east, and at least a little more larger area than what we saw the last couple of days there. And also very high fire danger reestablishing itself over the lower Yukon River Valley and in the west central interior. Then the extreme area still there in the Yukon Flats, but you can see became low just to the south there, a blue shaded area zone there because of some rainfall. Wetting rains occurred in that area over the last 24 hours. And then the higher fire danger, of course, kind of fades away as you head west into the Seward Peninsula. And from there, moving on to satellite imagery, you can see a low slowly moving eastward just south of the Aleutian chain. And that had a very active front yesterday, still carrying rain and wind today, but not quite as strong as yesterday with the 60 mile an hour wind gust at Nikolsky. Today, peak wind gust 46 miles an hour at Cold Bay out of the southeast. Cape Newenham picked up 41 miles an hour out of the east and southeast, with the Pribilof seeing winds gusting 30 to 40 miles an hour. With St. Paul picking up about 4/10 of an inch of rain in the last 24 hours and had some moderate rain going on today with a front right over them, right over the top of them, extending back down toward Bristol Bay. Otherwise, off to the east, we've got clouds over Kodiak Island and clear skies for the North Gulf Coast, Kenai Peninsula into south central Alaska. And on down the southeast coast, temperatures 75 to 80 this afternoon over the northern panhandle, sunshine all the way down to Dixon Entrance. And actually a lot of sunshine over the interior, but you can also see clouds developing, building, kind of lingering, more cloudiness, actually mostly cloudy skies over the eastern interior, but temperatures still pushing 80 toward Eagle this afternoon. And there are some scattered showers and developing thunderstorms there from the Brooks Range, eastern Brooks Range. Arctic Village, actually shower activity getting all the way up to the eastern Arctic coast there. Then back to the west, a weak trough bringing some pretty gusty winds, gusts to, let's see, 53 miles an hour at Cape Lisburne out of the south, and about 35 miles an hour at Point Hope, with a little bit of light rain, fog, and drizzle with that system there. As you can see, just enough gradient to kick those winds up. Of course, Cape Lisburne, a normally very windy area there in that pattern with low pressure coming across the Chukchi Sea. A little bit higher pressure over the southern Bering Sea, enough to kick those winds up there, but that was mostly the exception than the rule. Winds are very light over the North Slope and actually all of western interior Alaska. And then that trough did kick the winds up to Cape Newenham, as I mentioned, up to 41 miles an hour. The main front still back over the Alaska Peninsula and the Pribilof Islands. Low pressure keeping it cloudy and damp over the Adak-Atka area, but winds much lighter than yesterday. In fact, pretty light this afternoon, right under the low center there. A few showers developing over Kodiak Island, over the mountainous terrain there, as well as Bristol Bay. And as we saw, some showers and scattered thunderstorms over the Copper River Basin area northward into toward the Yukon River, and then up to the eastern Brooks Range, but sunshine. Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, most of the central and southern Copper River Basin, North Gulf Coast, and mostly sunny across all of the Panhandle. Forecast for tonight, that trough keeps IFR flying conditions in along the western Arctic coast down to Point Hope, just some variable clouds over Kivalina. Fair over the interior tonight with showers on the decreasing mode over the Alaska Range, and still showery over the eastern North Slope, eastern Brooks Range area with less activity out toward the coastline there. That front makes landfall along the southwest coast tonight from Nunivak Island down across Bristol Bay and the Aleutian Range. That'll push rain into Kodiak Island later tonight, slowly moving northward. Akiak, much better chance of seeing some rain tonight than, say, Kodiak State Airport. You have to wait till tomorrow to see the bulk of the moisture arrive there, but definitely rain moving into the southwest coast and trying to push into the southern Kuskokwim Valley. Showers on the increase over the Yukon Delta, and a lot of low clouds, fog, rain, and drizzle from Adak up to the Alaska Peninsula, but those winds will be slowly coming down there in those gusts for Cold Bay. Stays fair over the Panhandle, just a few clouds and some low clouds and fog over the Gulf of Alaska. And moving on to tomorrow, that front pushes the rain across Kodiak Island, actually through the Barren Islands into southern Cook Inlet. Some of that rain will reach the southern Kenai Peninsula, Kachemak Bay, Homer, Seldovia area. Showers on the increase, more clouds and a little bit better chance of showers tomorrow over southern Alaska, as the temperatures will be a little cooler, but still some sunshine, especially to start the day out. But showers will be increasing over the mountainous terrain, Chugach Mountains, mountains of the Kenai Peninsula, and of course the Alaska Range, and cloudy, showery conditions over the southwest interior, drier over the central and northern interior, and risk of some scattered thunderstorm activity along the central and eastern Brooks Range, as well as the mountains north and northeast of the Fairbanks area. Otherwise, another sunny and warm day for the Panhandle. Mostly sunny, light winds, just a few clouds, risk of some showers over toward the border, but those will be pretty widely scattered, more mist than hit. And again, stays a little breezy over the Alaska Peninsula with periods of rain, fog, and drizzle, and showers for Atka, but higher pressure drying it out for Adak westward to Shiminat with light winds and chance of sunshine out that way. Then for the first day of the weekend, that low continues to weaken, drifts over the Alaska Peninsula. Winds no longer a factor at all with this system, but the front holds together enough to bring cooler, cloudier, wetter conditions into southern Alaska, and actually clouds and showers will be increasing over much of the interior, central and eastern interior of the state as well. So temperature will be a little cooler Saturday than tomorrow, a little farther down in the 70s, 70 to 75, but we'll see the temperatures, forecast highs here in a minute. Otherwise, mostly sunny, partly to mostly sunny for the Panhandle, and dry conditions with light winds. And for lows tonight, 30s for the North Slope and Arctic coast, otherwise 40s and lower 50s for the remainder of the state. Lower 40s out over the Aleutians and Bering Sea, mid-30s though for the western Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island, and upper 40s to lower 50s for overnight lows for the southeast coast. Highs tomorrow back into the 70 to 77 degree range for the northern southeast coast, in the 60s elsewhere and near 70. And the Tanana Valley area, Fairbanks, 70 to 70 or 75 to 80 again from for the eastern interior, Eagle and Chokyitzek may hit the 80 degree mark. Otherwise, upper 30s for the central Arctic coast, but portions of the North Slope pushing well into the 60s, and 65 to 70 for the western interior. Cooler though, Bristol Bay, lower to mid 50s. And cooler south central Alaska, highs in the lower 60s around the Anchorage area, but upper 60s to Sitna Valley, but the Copper River Basin still reaching the lower 70s, followed by lows falling back into the upper 20s along the central Arctic coast. Otherwise, mostly in the upper 40s to lower 50s, interior Alaska, and upper 40s, lower 50s, south central Alaska as well. Copper River Basin, mid 40s, lower 40s for the Pribilofs, 40 to 45 for the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula area, and upper 40s, lower 50s for the Panhandle. And you can see cooler highs in store for the southeast coast on Saturday, upper 50s to mid 60s. Also, in the 60s for areas south and east of the Alaska Range. Southern Kuskokwim Valley in the upper 50s, mid 50s for Bristol Bay. And actually 65 to 75 for the central and eastern interior, and in the 30s to near 40 for the Arctic coast. Otherwise, out in the Bering Sea, 45 to 50 for your highs for the Aleutians, lower 50s for the Pribilof Islands, and mid 40s St. Lawrence Island.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather, VFR, interior Alaska. We got marginal VFR pushing up into the Alaska Range and Cook Inlet, western Cook Inlet, and some IFR into southern Cook Inlet across the Kenai Peninsula, Kachemak Bay, Resurrection Bay, and into Prince William Sound, and then down along the central and south coast of the Panhandle. Solid IFR, Bering Sea, Aleutians, right up across western St. Lawrence Island through the Bering Strait coast from Kivalina to Point Hope, Cape Lisburne, and right along the western central Arctic coast. And for the afternoon, IFR right along and mostly off the coast there, but catching Point Barrow on down to Cape Lisburne, Point Hope, and Tin City. Otherwise, still covering all the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. Marginal VFR for Bristol Bay. Marginal VFR into the southwest interior and about 2/3 of the way into the Kuskokwim Valley, or at least the southern half, and into northern Cook Inlet, actually, the marginal VFR, but still VFR for Turnagain, Kanikarm, Manuska, Susitna Valleys northward to the North Slope. Eastern Arctic coast stays VFR. IFR along and just off the coast of the Panhandle. And for the morning Saturday, no change out west, still IFR for the Aleutians and the Bering Sea and along the Arctic coast. Some IFR pushing in across Togiak Bay into the southern Kuskokwim Valley there in the southwest mountainous areas. Kodiak Island IFR, south side of the Alaska Peninsula, and some IFR inland over the central and southern southeast coast up toward Yakutat. Marginal VFR for the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound area, southern Copper River Basin, and probably into Portage, northward there into the Talkeetnas. Still holding on to some VFR for northern Cook Inlet and most of the Susitna Valley, Turnagain and Kanikarms. And for the afternoon, Saturday, IFR, western Prince William Sound and Seward, Resurrection Bay, down to Kodiak Island and the south side of the Alaska Peninsula, and IFR for the Bering Sea, but VFR for Adak and Atka, and IFR extends up across St. Lawrence Island through the Bering Strait, and just some marginal VFR in the central Arctic coast. Otherwise, everywhere else, VFR, North Slope, Brooks Range into the interior. Some marginal VFR, central southern Cook Inlet, pushing up along the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range. And for Anaktuvik and Adigan, both passes VFR for the day on Friday. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR flying conditions for both passes there, especially on the eastern approach. Rainy. Sarah VFR turning toward marginal VFR into the latter part of the afternoon. Windy VFR. Isabel VFR. Pretty good for Mentasta, VFR flying there. And for Tanita VFR. Portage VFR becoming marginal. Chilkoot and White VFR. Freezing levels 4,000 feet southern Bering Sea in the central Aleutians, 6,000 feet up along the southwest coast, and 4,000 feet, 4,000 to 6,000 feet western Arctic coast. Otherwise, around 8,000 feet in the interior on down across the Panhandle. And for icing, got areas of isolated moderate rime icing, kind of a big area there with all the moisture coming in from the southwest and that weakening front pushing into southern Cook Inlet, well into the southwest interior across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta and up to the Kuskokwim Mountains, but just spilling into southern Norton Sound, but extending westward to about Adak and, of course, the Pribilofs jet stream. Upper level low there at 33,000 feet just north of the Fox Islands. Southwest flow 75 to 85 knots there. And then it really diminishes as you get up into the central and southern mainland areas. Southwest 65 knots over the western or over the North Slope. North 65, Bering Sea into the Aleutians. And at 9,000 feet, west-southwest 20 to 35 knot winds, north sloping the Arctic coast, and 25 to 40 knot winds there from Kodiak Island to the Alaska Peninsula around that low center south and southeast of the Pribilofs, north 40 knots into the west central Aleutians. 3,000 feet, 40 knot southwest winds south of the Fox Islands, otherwise 35 knot northerlies out over the western Aleutians. Turbulence, isolated moderate chop, Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, Alaska Peninsula, the Aleutians westward to Kiska Island.
Howdy, star friends. Trace here. Next week is the summer solstice, where we celebrate our closest star, the sun. What better way to appreciate our day star than watching a star rise? Wake up before morning twilight and find a quiet place to point yourself east. Forget your phone, radio, TV. Let the sounds of the morning wash over you. This year, the moon, Jupiter, Mars, morning star Venus, and tiny Mercury all line up ahead of sunrise. Sit quietly and watch the brightening sky, the delicate colors. Listen and feel what happens around you. The wind blows, the temperature shifts, the world wakes. Start a voice note and listen to it a few days later. You're going to be surprised at your own genuine joy. After the show, enjoy the longest day of the year. Remember, we're just a tiny speck on a tiny speck around a glittering speck in a massive universe, and that's pretty awesome. Keep looking up.
The Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge is a refuge in Alaska. It's the third largest refuge in the National Wildlife Refuge System. North of Fairbanks, it's a vast ecosystem of wetlands. What drives this refuge are natural forces of fire, ice, and water.
The Yukon Flats has got a really interesting history. Back in the late 50s, early 1960s, there was a proposal to dam the Yukon River down by Rampart, which is downstream of the Yukon Flats. And it was a hydroelectric proposal. And so in order to assess the merits of that proposal, people got together because they were a little bit concerned about what the impacts might be on the Yukon Flats, the habitat, and all the people living within the Yukon Flats Refuge. There's quite a few people living within the refuge. We have 7 villages. So in order to figure out how special the Yukon Flats was, the Fish and Wildlife Service banded over 40,000 ducks within the Yukon Flats. And using the band return information, they found out that those ducks were using 45 of the 50 lower 48 states. They were using 7 foreign countries, and they were using most of the provinces over in Canada, as well as all the major flyways down in the lower 48. And so that identified that the Yukon Flats was a special breeding area, and that information, along with a lot of other public information that was gathered during that whole process, really ensured that the dam never did go in, and thus the habitat was preserved.
So what that did is it really highlighted the national importance of this area and how important conserving this particular area is for conserving many other natural areas in the lower 48 and even across the continent.
To protect the Yukon Flats Refuge because we have responsibility towards our future generations to leave land protected in the state that it is now. The Yukon Flats is a wild place. The ecosystem is intact and functioning, and you can't find that very many places in the rest of the U.S.
The Yukon Flats Refuge is among the most important places for ducks. So each spring, millions of ducks, and in addition to shorebirds and geese, raptors and loons, they all fly to the refuge to nest and rear their young. And the reason they are attracted to this area is because it has really enriched wetlands. They're lots of nutrients in the wetlands that provide a lot of food for the growing young.
We also have a lot of predator, prey species like bears and black bears, grizzly bears, wolves. We also have a lot of moose and fur bearers that use the refuge. So overall, there's just a great diversity of both upland, lowland, and migratory bird species that use the refuge.
Most people know the flats as a duck nursery, and that was one of the main purposes that was designed for, but a lot of recent research over the last decade has really illustrated how important it is to a variety of native endemic fish species for subsistence and recreational and commercial fisheries throughout the entire Yukon River Basin and out to supporting commercial fisheries out to the Bering Sea as well. So it supports a variety of different whitefish and salmon species, the northern pike, a little bit of everything that people rely on as cultural identities, but also for subsistence resources and where people go to recreate and enjoy being outside.
The type of recreation that you're going to find on Yukon Flats Refuge is very primitive. And what that often does is it gives people a complete break from some of the stresses of today's world. There are no cell phone towers out there. There are no roads. There are no trails. So any type of recreation that people have is entirely natural. The lands and waters within the Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge are open to the public to enjoy. And that's a really important tenet upon which the United States is built.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Coastal water forecast for the south coast. Looking winds northwest, 20 to 25 knots, seas 7 feet. Lighter winds on the north coast there, out of the west and northwest, 15 to 20 knots. Light variable winds at 10 knots over the inside waters from Dixon Entrance all the way up to Lynn Canal. Seas pretty slight at 2 feet. And for the first day of the weekend, Saturday, northwest winds increasing to 20 knots with seas building to 4 feet for Clarence Strait. Otherwise, for Stevens Passage, south winds 15 knots. Northern inner channels, Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, south winds 15 knots, seas 4 feet. And on the south coast, winds will be west-southwest 20 knots with 7-foot seas. Lighter winds up north coast looking southerly 10 to 15 knots. And for Cook Inlet, south to southwest winds 15 knots for Friday with 4-foot seas. Small craft advisories though for Kemishak Bay, southeast 25 knot winds in the forecast there. Southeast at 20 for the Barren Islands. Light variable winds for the western North Gulf Coast. Eastern North Gulf Coast, winds will be west at 15 knots. Prince William Sound, southwest winds 15 knots, seas 2 feet. And for Saturday, Prince William Sound, east winds 10 knots, seas 2 feet. North Gulf Coast, east-southeast winds 15 knots with 5-foot seas. And for the Barren Islands, southerly winds 20 knots, seas 5 feet. Kemishak Bay, east winds at 20 knots. And Cook Inlet, variable winds at 10 knots with 2 to 3-foot seas. Kodiak Island, south to southeast winds 15 to 20 knots. And south winds 20 to 25 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. Bristol Bay, southeast winds 20 knots. And for Saturday, Kodiak Island, east to southwest winds 15 knots with the easterly winds in Shelikof Strait. Seas will run 3 feet in Shelikof Strait to 7 feet along the east side of Kodiak Island. And for the area from Sitkinak to Cape Sarachev, south to southwest winds 15 to 20 knots, seas just under 10 feet. Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, northeast winds at 15 knots. In Bristol Bay, winds will be east at 15 knots with seas down to 2 feet. Front Alaska Island, small craft advisories for the day Friday. South winds 25 knots, seas 6 to 15 feet. Unmak Island, on average, west winds 15 to 25 knots. Adak and Atka, northwest winds 20 knots. Small craft advisories for Amchitka Island, westward to Shimia for northwest winds 25 knots. And for Saturday, from Shimia to Amchitka Island, look for west-southwest winds at 20 knots with 6-foot seas. Adak and Atka, west winds at 20 knots. Unmak Island, or actually both Unmak and Unalaska Island, winds will be west-northwest at 20 knots with 4 to 7-foot seas. Kuskokwim Delta coastline, winds will be southeast on Friday at 20 knots with 5-foot seas. Yukon Delta coast, northeast at 15. North winds 20 knots for St. Lawrence Island, variable winds at 10 knots for the Pribilofs, and northeast 20 knots with 7-foot seas for St. Matthew Island. And for the day Saturday, St. Lawrence Island and the Yukon Delta coast, winds will be northerly at 15 knots. Kuskokwim Delta coastline, northeast at 15 knots with just 3-foot seas. Pribilof Islands, north winds 15 knots, and St. Matthew Island looking at a northwest wind at 15 knots with 4-foot seas. For the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, variable winds 5 to 15 knots for the day Friday. Central and western Arctic coast, southwest at 15, with seas and ice-free waters up to 3 feet. And from Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson, west winds at 10 knots with 2-foot seas, and Cape Thompson to Wales, southwest winds 10 knots. For Saturday, variable winds 10 knots, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, central coast west at 10 knots. And then for the western Arctic coast, look for east winds at 10 knots. And from Cape Thompson to Wales, winds will be northwest at 10 knots with 2-foot seas. Front pushes rain in across Bristol Bay to southern Kodiak Island later tonight and begins to push it inland with showers over the Yukon Delta, northern Kuskokwim Valley into the western Alaska Range. Otherwise, basically dry over the remainder of interior Alaska. Weak trough brings some light drizzle and fog to the western Arctic coast, dry over the Panhandle. And for Friday, that front brings rain from Kodiak Island across the Barren Islands and southern Cook Inlet, across Bristol Bay, showers pretty widespread over the Yukon Kuskokwim Delta, Kuskokwim Valley, and showery and cooler with more clouds over south central Alaska. And then for Saturday, that front keeps rain in the Kenai Peninsula, possibly northern Cook Inlet as well.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.